I have to confess, a couple of days ago, I really wasn't sure if I was going to be able to talk, let alone be here with you and sing and be able to visit with you. But you know, things kind of come together, and I'm really glad to be here. I love the season. I really appreciate what Chase said. It's always nice when winter comes around to be able to put on at least a lightweight jacket. You know, in Arkansas, you never really know. Because we've been known to be wearing T-shirts and shorts at Christmas, and it's just kind of nice to have some season-appropriate weather. So, quick show of hands, after you're gone, how many here would like to be remembered because they were grossly obese? Just raise your hand if you want to be remembered because you were way too heavy. Nobody? No takers on that? How many of you would like to be remembered because you sang well? You know, 20 years from now, John's hand goes up. Absolutely. You know, John, that would certainly be a lofty aspiration for my son-in-law. I tease him, and it's all in good humor because my philosophy about singing is if you don't sing well, sing loud. And if you really don't sing well, sing louder. And John does that. You know, it's just amazing at how he came to our family already having that embedded in his DNA. How many of you would like to be remembered because of your athletic abilities? No, come on, be honest. Listen, I'd love to. It's not going to happen, but I'd love for it to be that way. Well, the fact of the matter is, we all have wonderful ideas about how we want to be remembered when we're gone. We're going to talk for a few minutes this morning about a guy whose greatest claim to fame in the Scriptures, biggest thing that can be remembered to be said about him was that, drum roll, hold on, wait for it, he was short. We teach our kids that song, you know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, climbed up in the sycamore tree, the good Lord for to see. Remember that? This guy's greatest claim to fame in the Scriptures is that he was short. There's some other things that we're going to talk about, but the big thing that he's remembered for, that Zacchaeus is remembered for, is that he was short. Our reading this morning is going to come from Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, beginning with verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hang on. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to your house, or to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. So here's the setting. Jesus is making his final journey, actually, to Jerusalem, and on the way to Jerusalem, he had to go through Jericho. Jericho was a bit of a super rest stop, super convenience store. It was kind of an oasis in the desert. It was a place that had everything that you would need, particularly if you were traveling. And so Jesus is passing through. Scriptures don't tell us really that Jesus was planning to stop there, just that he was passing through. But it's going to be the last time that Jesus journeys through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. And there's something about him that causes Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector in Jerusalem, to want to see him. Chief tax collectors had kind of an interesting role. First of all, we know that he was Jewish, as was the case. Scriptures point out, you're a son of Abraham. Blessings have come to this house. You're a son of Abraham. He's clearly of a Jewish person. He was a tax collector like Matthew and like others mentioned in the Scriptures, which was a little interesting because tax collectors were chosen by the Roman government, and they were chosen of the Jewish people. And what they would do, as you know, is they would take taxes from the people, except they also extracted from the people their salary. They got the kickback out of that thing. They got always collected more, generally more than was actually due. And you know, when the tax collector lives among you, he kind of knows when you're having a good year with the herd and when you're not. So he knows when you make a lot of money. He knows when the sheep are doing well. He knows when prices are up. And so he knows to extract more money from you. But a chief tax collector was even a different kind of person. He actually had other tax collectors that were reporting to him. So they got their cut, and then he got the money from the tax collectors, and so he kind of got to double dip. It was kind of like a pyramid scheme on steroids. I mean, he's got all these people bringing him money, and he gets to skim the money from the tax collectors. Romans were really very, very treacherous in setting this model up this way, you see, because what it did was it created the tax collector from among the Jewish people, so the Jewish people naturally hated the tax collectors. So it turned them against themselves. And Jewish people didn't like them because they were Jews. So it really created an interesting environment. If you were a tax collector in the first century, you didn't have many friends. And any friend that you had was probably your friend because you were wealthy. And particularly if you were a chief tax collector and you had that many people who were angry at you, and you had that many people who were not friendly to you because you were wealthy, you really had to work hard to have people that would associate with you. And yet those that did would associate with you because you were wealthy. And so Zacchaeus, although was a well-known person, was probably not very well liked. Sycamore trees. Sycamore trees were not like sycamore trees in Arkansas. These were sycamore fig trees. They were a tree that was cultivated because of their crop. They would typically come up out of the ground and not very far out of the ground. They had great limbs that extended horizontally. And so they were easy to climb, especially if you're short in stature, as the Scriptures go, I think, way out of their way to point out about poor Zacchaeus. So they're easy to climb. The interesting thing about it, if you ever have seen a picture of the fig trees that are talked about here, they're very leafy trees. There's a lot of leaves, there are a lot of fruit on them, the good ones. And so it's not just enough to climb up in the tree, because if you just climb up in the tree and you sit down beside the main body of the tree, you're not going to be able to see a whole lot, and not a lot of people are going to be able to see you, because in order to use a sycamore tree to gain a point of view, a good vantage point, to be able to see a distance, and particularly for Jesus to be able to look up and see you, you have to be willing to crawl out on that limb a little bit. Don't get ahead of me. But just climbing the tree's not enough. For Zacchaeus, he would not only have to get up the tree, which would have been pretty easy, but he would have had to go out on that limb in order for Jesus to see him. And it's interesting that in doing that, he did all that he could do to put himself in a position for confrontation with Jesus. He no doubt went up the tree and went out on the limb, and he did everything that he possibly needed to do, and everything else was up to Jesus. And Jesus did the rest. I think it's also worth noting that when Jesus looked up and saw Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus knew that his quest for the day had been successful. I mean, all he wanted to do was see him. That's really all he was after. This is like going to the big concert and the rock star or the country star or the whatever star you're going to see reaches out and, shakes your hand, that sort of thing. He's gotten way more now than he intended to accomplish when he comes to the show. And Jesus looks up at him and said, "Zacchaeus, come down, because I must go to your house today." And the scriptures specifically say that Zacchaeus came down gladly. And I think there's something in that for us, that his attitude in coming down the tree, his attitude in beginning his walk, was one that was based on joy. It was based on an amount of appreciation. It was based on a heart that was happy. It wasn't based on one that was dreadful. It wasn't based on one that always looked for things to complain about and things to grumble about and things to find wrong in other people. The scriptures say that Zacchaeus came down gladly because the Lord had chosen him to go to his house. And we know the rest of the story. Now, this story with Zacchaeus is much like Jesus' story in John chapter 4 in meeting the woman at the well, who came and they had an interaction and Jesus revealed himself to her and she goes on her way. And it's also similar to that story in that we don't really know what happened to her. We don't know a lot about what happened to her after that. And we don't know a whole lot about what happened in inspired literature, especially about what happened to Zacchaeus. Now, there's some other texts that indicate that he was a significant person, that he was a player. We don't really know that from the New Testament. It doesn't really tell us that, but we do know this. We do know that by him doing what he could do, by him doing everything that he could do to put himself in a favorable position with God, God did the rest and said, "I'm going to your house today. Not only am I going, I must go to your house today." And he was blessed because he was willing to listen, he was willing to seek, he was willing to listen, and he was willing to gladly follow. So what's our lesson from the story of Zacchaeus? First of all, I think in this story it's important for us to understand that Zacchaeus did not allow himself to be defined by all the hate that was around him, directed at him. Zacchaeus refused to accept the world's definition of what kind of person he was, because remember, Romans hated him, the Jews hated him. He was not accepted openly in either group as a friend. And we're so vulnerable today to definitions from the world. We're too fat. We're too skinny. We're too tall. We're too short. Our teeth aren't white enough. We have trouble sleeping. We must have a mental disorder because, if you listen to all the definitions that are floating around us, we have completely lost our minds, and we are completely worthless individual, because that's what the world wants to tell us. That's what the world wants you to believe about yourself, because if it can convince you that there's something wrong with you, it can sell you something. And we've completely sometimes lose sight of God's perspective of us and the way what God sees when He looks down at us. Because God still looks down at us and says, you're precious. You're precious in my eyes. You're a priesthood. You're not unholy because you've made mistakes. You're not a wicked person because life threw some hardballs at you and you couldn't hit them. You're not a bad person because you haven't always made the best decision. You're a child of mine. And not only are you a child of mine, but I'm giving you a special place at my table because you went up the tree and you went out on the limb and you saw me and you invited me in and I came. By the way, that's a little bit of a misstatement. This is one of the rare instances where Jesus said, I'm coming to your house. Zacchaeus never said, Lord, will you come? Jesus just said, I'm coming. Don't accept what the world wants you to believe about you. Please don't. You don't have enough money. You don't spend the money that you've got right. Your car's not good enough. Don't buy that. Don't buy those lies. Never allow the world to define you. I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine known for many years. It had some things happen in their career that weren't really good, certainly never planned on them happening that way, caused some unfortunate things to happen. I said, remember this. This conversation happened this past week. I said, remember this. Don't believe everything that everybody's saying about you. Don't believe all that stuff. Remember who you are. And remember who you belong to. Remember who you serve. Because that alone makes you special. Don't accept the world's definition. Zacchaeus didn't. Sometimes the biggest obstacle between us and coming to know God and coming to follow God is ourselves. I know. That's not typically who we blame. When things don't go well, that's not usually who we point our fingers at, but it's the truth. Usually. When we find those times in our life when things just aren't falling in place like they're supposed to, when things don't happen the way they're supposed to, it's usually us. It's usually us for acting too quickly and not ever waiting and listening for that word of God to direct our hearts. Or it's us because we struggled with the decision that for God was a no-brainer, and we struggled and we struggled and we struggled, and we made a really easy decision, a really hard decision, and wound up allowing our own personal agenda to get in God's way. We're the biggest obstacle to standing in the way of us and God. Zacchaeus said, you know what? I'm short. Okay, I got that. I don't see over people. I'm not going to be able to see him, but I've got to see him. What can I do? Scripture tells us that he actually ran ahead to kind of get ahead of the crowd as the crowd's gathering along the parade route. He runs ahead to get to the tree first, and then when he gets to the tree, he goes up the tree. And then has to get in a position in the tree so that he can see him. And Zacchaeus made the decision to do that. It was Zacchaeus' call. And he refused to let himself, let his height, let other people's perspective get in the way of him and God. Once you come to taste the goodness of God, you'll not allow anything except yourself to get in the way. It'll become priority for you. It'll become priority for you. The tree could have been a problem for Zacchaeus. It could have been. I mean, he was a short guy to start with. Fig trees are pretty easy to climb. Those initial branches are kind of low. Pretty easy to get up to. Pretty easy to get up from there. See, something about the Lord attracted him. I don't know what it was. Scriptures don't tell us that. We just know that he was drawn enough that he had to see him. He had to see him. And would do whatever it took to see him. I really think that for a lot of us, God is standing there saying, I'm ready for you to follow me when you're ready. When you're ready, I'm ready for you to follow me. And following sometimes is tough. And it's tough because we make it tough. And once we come to know him, we begin a journey And there's no telling where that journey will take us. You don't really know. You don't really know. It might lead you, based on your convictions, based on your principles. It may lead you to a barn. It might take you to a barn that's out in the middle of a pasture. I've confessed to you before, and you guys, I know a lot of you don't know what I'm talking about. I miss that barn. There's a little slogan thing out in the foyer. Says, "Bless this barn." I think we saw it. Leanne, did we buy that at Tractor Supply or Atwood's, one of those places? We saw that years ago. I said, we got to take that to the barn. And when we got ready to move out here, I said, I don't know about the rest of it, but that thing's got to go with us. There's a journey. There's a journey that God has for us. And I don't know where mine's going to go, and you don't know where yours is going to go always. But as long as we're walking with Him, it really doesn't matter. As long as we make those decisions up to that point that keep us in contact with Him and keep us in fellowship with Him and keep us in love with Him and keep us in contact with God's people, it really doesn't matter where the journey takes us. Somebody says, you saying you got to come to church? You know, attendance is typically not a good measure of your faith. It is a pretty good measure of your journey. Because people that are in step with God, people that are walking with God, people that are making that journey with God have to be in contact with God's people every chance they get. But it's a wonderful journey. It's a journey that promises great adventure. It promises some experiences. Some of them are going to break your heart, and some of them are going to build you up and make you fly so high. But there's one thing for certain, it's a journey, and we're all making it together. We all go on this journey together, and that journey takes some of us to places where some of us don't want to go, but those who go there are just tickled to death. And it may take others into areas that this group over here doesn't like, but this group over here likes it. And I hope, you heard Harley's comments earlier. I hope you understand in this family of believers, wherever you feel like there's an opportunity to do something good to serve, do it. Do it. And if you need help, come back and get some of us and we'll go with you. Because we're all going on this journey together. And journeys are always fun to take with other people, and they're seldom fun to take by yourself. Lessons from Zacchaeus. That's what I got. We're gonna sing a song, and there will be people in the back that will be happy to serve you if you've got something spiritually that you need help with. We'll be happy to do that. If you're still trying to feel your way on this journey and you just need some support and you need hugs and you need encouragement and you need prayer, that's what we're here for. That's why we exist. Whatever your need might be, just feel free to make your way to the back as we're singing, and we'll be happy to serve you. If you need to come into contact with Jesus, we'll do that. You've seen us do that before. We stand here this morning ready to serve you.